All right. All right, so welcome everybody. I want to welcome you to the Mental Performance Seminar. So we created this seminar to really provide players with the opportunity to learn the mental tools and give them the opportunity to learn from different perspectives. So I wanted to bring in a psychology area, to bring in a strength and conditioning area, athletic trainer and physiotherapy area, and then nutrition. And we have 4 different experts to cover those areas. And we're going to be I'm going to have a conversation with each of these experts. So what I want to create is an open dialogue here. So if we could shift that slide over, I just want to show who we have on the call. So for our experts, we have Sharon, and she's going to be covering the sports psychology area. Then we have Austin White, who's going to be covering the strength and conditioning. We have Matt Arnott, who's going to be covering physiotherapy, and then Alex Winike, or Winnie. I always mess up your name, Alex. I apologize. And awesome. All right. And for sports, he's going to be covering sports nutrition. So Austin, do you want to give everybody just a brief explanation of the kind of core rules for the Zoom seminar? All right.
Yeah, sure. So I'm sure a lot of you have used Zoom since COVID, in the COVID era. But basically, we really have 3 rules that we're going to establish for this webinar. First is to treat the event as if we're in the same room. I'll be spotlighting and making sure that the speakers are present, but I think it's important just to make sure that if you're not speaking to turn off your audio. The second thing is to have a pen and paper ready and be prepared to take some notes. I think we have a lot of great speakers today and a lot of great insights that you all will be able to take away with you. And then the third thing is we will have a Q&A at the end of the session. So just save all the questions for the end and be sure to write those down so that way we can have an engaging conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, Austin. All right. So the first person I want to bring on is Sharon. And Sharon, if you want to give a brief introduction to who you are and what you're all about, and then we can really kick this thing off.
Absolutely. Thank you, Corson. So my name is Sharon Sumler. I'm an athletic counselor here at The Ohio State University in Columbus. Here I provide athletic counseling to our student athletes. So I work with about 9 of our teams on a staff of 4. So there's 4 of us in our sports psychology department. We work with athletes from anything from kind of lower level concerns, day-to-day sleeping, relationships, school, to anxiety, depression, and some of our more concerning mental health areas that can sometimes take us out of sport. I previously played basketball at a Division II university in Austin, Texas. And before that, have a lot of military connections. My dad was in the Army, so I've moved around quite a bit, but I called Texas home. I'm excited to talk to you today, Corson.
Awesome. All right. Well, to start off, I wanted to kind of dive right into the mental area of just understanding mental performance issues as a overall topic. So where would you like to start there?
Yeah, I think when we think of mental health, a lot of times we think of the more clinical terms like anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder. But it really, when I talk to our student athletes and even in younger student athletes, K through 12, I talk about like fear and confidence and burnout. Some of those terms we don't necessarily think of as like mental health related. Sometimes we think, oh, like that's just being afraid of something or not feeling confident in ourselves. But I really guess today I want to spend some time just kind of breaking down what that really looks like in practice.
Right. Yeah. And I think that is one of the things that I've really found as a player and things that I've seen with other players is, yeah, it's very common you want to think, oh, well, it has to be an extreme situation in order for it to be something that's like mental health related, when in reality, I see everything as kind of a mental performance spectrum. And you're really trying to figure out where am I? I'm at 100% and I'm performing perfectly mentally, or is there something that's not working?
Absolutely. And I think, like you said, a lot of times athletes feel like it does have to be pretty extreme in order to seek help for it. But I always encourage our student athletes, once you start seeing any change in yourself, to really just reach out and talk to somebody. It could be, a coach or a parent or a teammate, but really start to just say, hey, something's a little different. Maybe I should talk to someone about it. The same way that you would if, your ankle started hurting. Hopefully, you wouldn't just like keep grinding through and keep playing on it and keep playing on it. You'd want to make mention of it early on. That's
Right.
the key piece.
Awesome. Yeah. And is there any kind of like cues that you notice that their players should be looking for if they start to notice them come up, that maybe that's the time where they want to step in and start talking to someone about how they can kind of work on their mental game?
Yeah, I really back to those really subtle changes. So changes in your sleep. If you're usually a really good sleeper and then all of a sudden, that's a big red flag for us too. Like when working with our student athletes, all of a sudden you can't fall asleep. It's taking, 3, 4, maybe all night to get to sleep. Or you're waking up constantly throughout the night, waking up early, worried about, your alarm going off and getting to practice. Those are some like subtle cues. Our body usually will tell us things physically. That's how it communicates with us. So I think sometimes we overlook small changes like that and say, oh, that's just, not getting a good night's sleep, or maybe I was watching too much TV. But if we don't catch that early on, it could really turn into something where like it's really impacting your performance. I would say the same with like appetite. That's a big one that people don't necessarily slow down enough to think about. But if your appetite's changing, like for example, if you've normally been, it's easy to eat, you usually get your calories in, but then all of a sudden you have no appetite, you don't want to eat, the sight of food maybe makes you nauseous, that kind of stuff. A lot of times we don't connect that appetite stuff with your brain, but that's the way your body's kind of telling you, hey, something's going on, something's a little different right now.
Right. Awesome. And so with that, what are some of the kind of tools and things that players can start to look into or discuss with kind of experts in terms of, let's say, to start off with more of the short term to deal with these things?
Yeah, and I was talking about kind of the small changes. Another like huge marker is when you start realizing that you're not enjoying your sport as much as you used to.
Mhm.
A lot of times people will say, oh, it's just been like a busy season, or, practices have been really hard.
Mhm.
I think slowing down enough to say, wait, is this really like overtraining, or am I not really committed to the sport anymore, or really invested in it? Maybe I need to take some time away. So part of it, I think, is about slowing down enough to listen to your body and not just like speeding through to pretend like nothing's going on, which I think we do a lot. We're just like, no, I don't want to think about it. I'll just keep practicing really hard and it'll get better. But really acknowledge how you feel, and then talking to somebody. Again, it doesn't have to be like a sports psychologist, but talking to a teammate like, hey, I've been feeling really sleepy. Have you noticed anything in me? Like, do I look tired? Am I like lagging in practice? Just kind of getting that external feedback can be really helpful. But a lot of times we don't want to make the problem real. So we just like keep it inside and hope no one notices. But I think being willing to just to say to a coach or a teammate, hey, have you noticed any changes in me? Maybe this is something I need to talk to a professional about, maybe.
Right. Got it. And in terms of kind of a more long-term approach, what are some of the things that you kind of start to look into to help players? I think just having an understanding maybe of what the approach is can kind of maybe demystify some of the work that players do with someone, because I know for me it's very easy to especially when I was younger, it's very easy to be hesitant to go to someone and say like, I don't know if there's something wrong, or if I'm really just, maybe I'm just not mentally tough enough kind of thing. And yeah, I was curious, like, what is the approach that you kind of start to look into?
Yeah, so from like a clinical approach, I generally use cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. But what that means, for someone who may be seeking a longer term solution and seeking sports psychology or athletic counseling, I would say it depends on the practitioner, which is why sports psychology has become such a important and relevant term for us lately, because folks who understand the needs and demands of athletes can kind of tailor the clinical approaches to meet the athlete's needs. So I think finding someone who has some awareness of athletics or what the demands of what a being an athlete means.
Mhm.
But then once you're actually meeting with someone, whether that's in an office or walking around the rink with someone, it's usually very conversational, and it's really just like kind of how I was talking about sleep. I usually start there, like, what's sleep look like lately? What does appetite look like lately? What's your day-to-day look like? Just really trying to get a baseline of this person's life. I'm really not coming in because this person's the expert, so I'm just trying to learn from them, like what their life looks like, and then maybe ask some questions to see if there's room for changes or modifications. And that might look like, why do you play hockey? Like, what makes you show up every day? Let's talk about that. And if you can't identify that, maybe we spend some time really on some goal setting or trying to identify what your motivations are. That's kind of so a lot of it's conversational, a lot of it's questions about your day-to-day and trying to figure out if we can provide some solutions.
Right. Yeah. And that is the crazy thing, is how it is so much more simple and less scary than I think people often make it out to be. So I'm glad you're able to kind of highlight that it is more of a conversation than it is some kind of wild assessment that you get kind of strapped into a chair and now you're going to get your brain picked apart kind of thing.
Exactly.
That's awesome. And kind of building off those ideas, and what are some of the things you start to notice in terms of kind of the things players are running into most commonly in terms of like stigmas in especially hockey, because obviously that's kind of the focus of the conversation today. So I know some things like kind of masculinity, and obviously there's kind of some areas where eating disorders and things like that can start to come in and become kind of maybe something people don't notice is occurring. But I think like weight gain, muscle, weight loss is something that's really big.
Yeah, I think a big focus of ours and a lot of practitioners is to really kind of break down those stereotypes. So, you mentioned eating disorders. The first time, usually when you hear the word eating disorder, we think of women, like a woman who's, losing weight comes to mind. We don't even think of, the wrestlers who are trying to make weight, or the hockey players who need to be big and strong, but maybe don't really like being that big and kind of taking up that much space. So we talk a lot with our male athletes in particular about kind of helping them identify where the insecurities are. I would say, like, if I'm thinking about a woman and a man, females tend to criticize internally. Like, they're really good at being like, oh, I don't like my body, I don't like this, I don't like that. Men will generally give appreciation externally. Instead of saying what they don't like, they'll just say like, hey team, some teammate, like, your gains look great, or your arms look great, or your legs look great. But they won't say like, I'm really struggling with my own a whole lot. So it's really trying to give them the language of like, what makes you happy about your body, and how can we kind of change what's going on right now to make you feel more secure and comfortable in your body, and to know that that's okay. I think sometimes, particularly with male athletes, they don't feel like there's room for that kind of conversation or like that type of thinking. It's like, I should just like my body, and I should be able to get in the gym and change it how I want and when I want. And we know that sometimes that's not the case.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I totally get that. That's why I thought it was worth bringing up, because it's very easy to just kind of pass by that and not really think anything of it. But again, it all plays into, if you don't have to deal with that insecurity, it's going to help you play better, because you can show up, train harder, and not kind of have to deal with that stuff.
Yeah. And I was having a thought just about how to help people feel more secure with their bodies, and kind of giving them the space to explore what it is that they like and dislike about their body. And I think particularly for young male athletes, it's giving them the tools, again, that language, how to ask for help, and knowing that it's normalized. And that's what we've seen lately with more professional athletes using their platform to talk about their struggles, so that people can see like, oh, it's okay for guys to get on a worldwide platform and say, I struggled with X, Y, or Z. That can really help too.
Right. Yeah, I totally see what you're saying. Awesome. And there's another topic that I really wanted to dig into, which is like, when people are struggling with more of the kind of the performance on the ice side, and things aren't really going well, something I really wanted to talk about and just kind of dig into a bit is, what are some of the approaches that you try to take to help players figure that stuff out? Because I know for me, like, if I'm kind of riding high and my points are kind of rolling in, things are really easy. and you kind of start to feel like you're all good. But then the second you go through kind of a slump and you're not performing well, it's kind of, you feel like the lowest of lows kind of thing. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to get maybe a few tools, or what your thoughts are on what some approaches you can start to take to kind of deal with those types of things.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think one, as a society, we have to get better at appreciating the effort that people put forward and not just the outcome. Because I think we really enjoy it when someone wins or when something goes well, but we know that sometimes you can have your best game. You could have done better than you've ever done before and still not win the game. So we gotta help our young athletes kind of figure out how to find positivity and motivation and success in their own efforts and performance, and not just what the outcome is, because we can't always control that.
Mm-hmm.
I think so. In short, being committed to the process and not just the outcome. I'll hear from a lot of athletes like, "Oh, I just want to win this game so bad. I just like I'm so nervous. I just want it to go so well." And I try to help them slow down and think about like, what are the smaller things that have to be in place for that to happen, and can you commit to what you can control, whether that's, again, getting enough sleep, getting the right nutrition, hydration, those are the big ones. And then also, what 3 things do you want to do well this game? Like, focus on some smaller skills instead of just the big win. And I think we also have to normalize failing at things. And so we have to find benefit in failing. Otherwise, our athletes aren't going to want to try new things. And we know when we have to go to a new team or a new school, it's going to be a challenge. And so that's going to be uncomfortable. But if we allow ourselves to feel comfortable in that discomfort and knowing that you're not going to do well every day at practice, but that doesn't mean you're not growing. Like, progress and success is not linear.
Right. Got it. Yeah. And the final thing I wanted to touch on was, what is the role of a sports psychologist in kind of in terms of a team's overall performance team? What do you kind of, what do you consider the time when you should get involved in a player's performance? And I know we kind of highlighted that at the beginning, but I think it's to get kind of a clear understanding of when it's worth as a player to step in and say, hey, okay, now I want to start looking at the psychology part, and when should I do this? How do I do it? And what's kind of like a smooth way to do that without feeling like you're causing like a big scene?
Right. I would say there's no wrong reason or wrong time to reach out. There's not like you have to have 3 bad nights of sleep and your practices are awful before you reach out. I think I would rather know, like, at one night when something changes just slightly. Hey, things have been a little weird, and we can try to do some things earlier on that can be really effective. But the role of a sports psychologist, and of course it's unique to different settings and whether, the sports psychologist is on staff or not, or if you are looking for someone in the community the way you might look for your doctor. The role is really to consult with the program. So here at Ohio State, I'm going to use that as an example, is to consult with the coaches, consult with administrators on the needs of our athletes. So I'm, giving information, hey, these are some trends that I'm seeing. But then also it's to work in an individual way and a team way. So you'll probably see a sports psychologist doing kind of one-on-one sessions. Like I said, it could be in an office, or it could be just like out walking around, or working with teams, giving talks about motivation or sleep or burnout, trying to do some prevention. And then, so it's both prevention and intervention, where we are, actively building tools, but sometimes we're just kind of building relationships so that people know, like, oh, something's off. I already know Sharon. I've seen her around. I can just reach out to her.
Right. Awesome. Well, I think that's a great way to finish off our conversation. So thank you so much. And we'll keep things rolling.
Of course.
Awesome. So Austin White. So this is going to be more the strength and conditioning perspective on mental performance, and then as well physical performance. So Austin, if you want to give yourself an introduction, that'd be awesome.
Hey, Corson. What's going on, buddy? So yeah, my name is Austin White. I'm the Director of Strength and Conditioning here at Method Hockey. We train, pretty much kids as young as 7 to kids playing in the juniors. So we see a wide variety of kids, all different ages, all different sports, all different backgrounds. So I've been with Method since they first opened in 2019. Been there, been working with kids, like I said, all different ages, backgrounds, sports. So it's a wild ride, and it's pretty fun. So it's not like, it's definitely not like work. I definitely enjoy it. So.
That's great. Cool. Well, to start off, what, in terms of kind of just strength and conditioning as a whole, what should young athletes and athletes know about this area? Because I think it's one of those things where it's very easy to just think this is an area where, okay, you're just going to go and then your job is to help me put on muscle. That's the most common thing that I used to think of with strength and conditioning. So if you just want to give like a brief introduction to that.
Yeah. So I feel like now, in this century that we're in now, strength and conditioning is definitely pulling towards a better area. You know, back in even early 90s and the early 2000s, right? It was always about just getting guys as strong as we possibly can. Strength is king, strength is king. That's all that matters. When in reality, there's so many more factors that goes into creating an athlete that's, you know, not just strong, right? We got to get them powerful. We have to get them fast. We have to make sure that they're mobile. They can change direction. You know, it's not always just about, hey, who can squat the house, who can deadlift like a hippo, right? Like, it doesn't even matter. Does strength matter? Yes, but there's different areas that need to be looked at a little bit more. And where the field is going is where it should have been. You know, now more than ever, speed is becoming so much more prevalent. You know, like I said before, it was always about, you know, what your 1 rep max was. When reality, it doesn't matter, right? Like, it doesn't matter if you bench press or do dumbbell bench. Like, if you watch a hockey game, that guy right there does dumbbell bench. That guy right there does barbell bench. Like, no one knows, right? So doing things that allows the athlete to feel good, to look good, you know, allows them to, you know, express what they have to express on the ice or the field, right? That's all that really does matter.
Yeah, I totally get that. And in terms of kind of the psychological side of training, what do you find is kind of the important part to understand for really any athlete?
So yeah, so the psychological side of it, you know, that's part of the coactives right there. So there's psychological, technical, tactical, and then the physical capabilities. So, you know, working with young kids that I work with now, bullying is so prevalent now more than ever. It's absolutely awful. Confidence is what I want to give these kids, you know, no matter if they're 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, all the way up to juniors, right? So confidence is number one. Number two, like the psychological side, right? We want to create these long lasting relationships, right? Having these kids develop these relationships with coaches, with staff, with peers, teammates is so vital in their early development stages. Along with that, right, it helps kids feel safe, helps kids feel like they're a part of something greater than them, gives them a sense of purpose and belonging, right? So the whole point of, sure, strength and conditioning is, you know, sets, reps, weight, but look, it's more than that. It's developing relationships with these kids. It's allowing kids to develop relationships with others. And a real life story. So, you know, I stuttered my entire life, right? So since I was 6, hated talking, didn't want to talk to a single person, was afraid to talk. What strength training and playing organized sports gave me was the confidence that I needed to feel that I was accepted, right? So my teammates did not care that I stuttered. I thought they really did, but really, did they really? No, right? But it allowed me to feel accepted. It gave me the confidence to be myself. And I feel like that's why I'm a really good coach right now, is because, you know, I connect with so many athletes on so many different levels, right? You know, it's not always about, you know, like I said, reps, sets, weight, sprints, right? It's about connecting and the psychological side of it.
Right. That's awesome. And so transitioning more into the specifics of actual strength training. So what is it like about strength training that is so important for players to learn? And what's important about I guess the tactical side, like what we should understand as players? Because obviously you can just look up like brief videos and kind of get a rough understanding, but like what should we be thinking? How should we think of strength training as part of our overall performance game?
Yeah, it's just like anything else. Like, you feel good, you're probably going to be good, right? So if you feel good, you know, that's going to carry over so much. You know, if you feel strong, if you feel fast, if you feel more explosive, you're going to be more inclined to do certain things in games that you may not usually do, right? So if I'm feeling fast, I'm going to try to outbeat this guy, right? If I'm feeling powerful, I may try something a little bit different, right? So, you know, but if I'm feeling slow, if I'm feeling hurt, if I'm feeling, you know, something negative, I'm going to think twice about putting myself in certain situations that I may have to, but I don't want to, like getting in the dirty areas, right? Like, that's a big part of it, right? But if you're not feeling up to the challenge and feeling good about yourself being into that game, you may think twice about it, right? So just like the psychological side of it, right? So if you feel good, if you feel strong, you feel powerful, you feel fast, you're not, that's my job to, you know, make these kids those qualities, but also tell them that, hey, Sam, you are fast, you are strong, right? Like, this is going to be your game that you're going to score 3 points, right? And he may not. But if the coach is telling him that, his strength coach, you know, he's going to feel great. And that's half of the job that we really do. We want to make these kids, no matter what age, you know, feel a part of something better than them, and, you know, make them feel great.
Right. That's awesome. And so say a player doesn't have a chance to actually go to a strength and conditioning coach, and they don't have access to that, because I know that is a pretty common thing. For me, I didn't really have a like legitimate coach that I went to consistently throughout my whole career. But what can someone do to kind of try to simulate that, or what can they do to learn more and kind of add this part to their game?
I would try to find one. You know, I know it may not be the answer you want to hear, but find a coach, find a credited place that has great coaches, number one, great athletes who are currently there, and a positive environment that works for you, right? Two different places may have two different outcomes. So you may like to go to this one spot, this one coach, you know, great reviews, people love it, but you may not like it for some odd reason, right? So just get out there, see what type of coaches you like, see what type of athletes are coming out of there. But say you live in rural Indiana where there's nothing around you, you're just lakes, waters, stones. That's your workout there. If you find a hill, start sprinting on it. You want to pick some stones up and squat them, right? So just get out there, do something. Something is better than nothing. You know, start to sprint more, right? Start to jump more, do body weight workouts. You know, anything is better than nothing. You could always sort of reach out to myself. I could definitely help. But yeah, if you don't have anything, just do something. And your sport, the sport that you're playing is going to be the best physical workout that you can get, right? So play your sport, play it often, play multiple sports, right? That's going to help you playing multiple sports is going to help you in so many different ways. It's going to help build different qualities. See, I told you, stutter. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Qualities. So yeah, just get out there and be you.
Yeah, I totally get that. And one point you said that really stood out to me was the reaching out to coaches and actually looking to, even if it's not work with them like one-on-one, but like being willing to actually reach out and say, hey, like, would you be able to help at all here? Because I think that more coaches are willing to do that than maybe we realize as players. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, the more coaches, the more voices. There's so many different coaches out there with different experiences, different coaches who were taught by other different coaches, right? So, the way I coach may not be the way another coach coaches or another coach coaches, right? So, being a athlete, right? Try to get a lot of different areas. Try to reach out to different coaches that you want to kind of work with. Like I said, not every coach is exactly the same. Some may feel inclined to do things a little bit differently than you do. And that's okay, right? That's what makes humans humans, and that's what makes everyone different, right? I may like Olympic lifting, but Coach B absolutely hates it. That's okay. We're all different. So
got it.
As long as we have the athlete's heart as number one, that's all that matters, right? As long as we have their personal well-being as number one, it's all that really matters.
Right. Yeah, I totally got that. And I think building off that, in terms of injury prevention, that's something I've dealt with surgeries. I've had a lot of different injuries in the past. And I wanted to hear your take on just injury prevention as a whole and what you think is the key that players should be looking at to try to deal with that area.
Yeah. So are injuries preventable? No. Probably don't want to hear me say that, but no injury is preventable. You play a sport that requires you to skate extremely fast, stop on a dime, cut, decelerate, reaccelerate, all while trying not to get your head smashed in. Injuries are unpreventable. As the game becomes quicker, right? As the drills become more reactive, as the game situation heightens, that's when the chance of injury starts to go up. If it's a faster game speed, more reactability, all that is going to go up. Now, what's the best way to prevent an injury? Don't play the sport. But you're all here right now because you all play sports. So what can we do as professionals to really help you? All right. So what we can do is build foundational strength joint by joint. Okay. We want to build armor. We want to be able to create robustness and resiliency, right? And as strength coaches, right, we're pretty much stress mitigators. We are stress managers, right? So we need to understand what the game demands and what the position demands, right? So we pretty much want to reverse engineer the demands of what the game is, what the position is. From then, we can actually look at, okay, what's the most common injury sites followed with that certain sport? So many things that we see for hockey right now. I mean, it's labrum, it's adductor, it's another one, rotator cuff, right? So a lot of upper body and lower body, right? So are those preventable during a hard season where you're playing 3-4 games a week? No, but it's our job as professionals to help build that armor, to help build that robustness, right? So we want to help, create these strong areas joint by joint to make sure these athletes can play 2-3 games a week for 20 weeks. This was our longest season yet. Longest season. These kids came to me the first day off season. They looked like they were dead. So, right. So we're just trying to be stress managers, stress mitigators, really trying to just develop robustness and make sure these kids, are able to last an entire season.
Right. And with kind of training and preparation, I think that one area especially that I struggled with was understanding what overtraining is, and understanding that there is a point at which you're pushing your body too far, and that can tie into the idea of injuries. And I just wanted to hear your take on how to, like, when to identify this has occurred and you're starting to kind of hit that point where you're pushing your body too much, and what can you do to start to deal with that?
So what I've found overtraining, right? Maybe not overtraining, but dealing with total stress on the body throughout the season, right? So we're midway through, our teams have a lift at 6 o'clock, right? They walk in, they're just slumping, not talking, laying on the foam rollers. But 4 weeks ago, they were smashing each other with like the foam rollers, talking over the music, right? So as coaches, I know without doing any test how they are that day.
Right.
We don't need to do a jump test. We don't need to do a hand grip test to test their CNS. Just be a good coach. Watch how they walk up the steps, right? So like I said before, what strength coaches are, we're stress mitigators, right? So we're stress managers. I am in constant communication with the head coach all the time. I know what he's doing that week and that month. I want to make sure my plan that I'm doing in the gym matches with what he's going to be doing or what she is, right? So if we're doing sprints that day and the coach is like, hey, we're doing bag skate. Okay, well, you know what I'm not going to be doing that day? I'm not going to sprint them, right? So every coach and strength coaches has to be 1A and 1B, like always constant talking, communicating, because we want to make sure that we're managing that total stress on that body and making sure these kids can perform at their highest capabilities when it is game time, right? So, constant communication, trying to just get the most out of these guys every single day. So,
right. Yeah, I totally got that. And that it's interesting because Sharon said kind of a very similar thing, which is it's this kind of more communication. It's more of just that you're having a conversation with all these people, as opposed to just kind of drawing kind of like, here's the plan for the year and we're just going to follow it. Because I know most of the injuries I've ran into, especially in the off season from overtraining or pushing too much, have been from trying to stay strict and not treating things as, okay, well, if I'm struggling and my energy levels are extremely low, I need to actually be aware of that and be paying attention to how my body's feeling. So I definitely have been through making that mistake.
Yeah. I mean, say you only have $100 like a day, right? If my lift is going to take $50, you broke up with your girlfriend, that's another $50. That's a lot of stress. Your parents are bickering, they're not getting along, that's another $50. Say the coach puts you through hell, that's another $50, right? So like there's so many, like I said, we need to make sure that we are in full cohesiveness every single day. We only see these athletes 1 or 2 hours like a day. right? So we don't know what's going on the other 22 hours, right? So we want to make sure that our program, it's not set in stone. You have to be very agile, being able to, like I said, if you were planning on squatting heavy that day, like 85, 88%, and they come up and like, hey, coach, we can't even move. Well, hey, I guess we're not going to be doing that then, right? So you can't be tied to what you have set. You have to always be agile, always taking in communication from others. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, that's great. Well, I really appreciate it, Austin. That definitely highlights some of the mistakes I've made as a player, and hopefully players can kind of take that wisdom and apply it to their training.
Awesome.
Thank you. All right. So next we have Matt coming up. So Matt, if you want to give a brief introduction to what you're all about.
Well, my name is Matt Arnott. I am a physiotherapist in Brantford, Ontario, and that's up in Canada. I don't know if most of your viewers are US bound or where they're from, but physio's physio wherever you do it. I have been practicing for 20 years, actually, physiotherapy. The last 3 or 4, I've also been involved with a prep school up here in Brantford, and they have a hockey and basketball program going there. So that's been my experience working with the professional athlete side, as well as people coming to see me privately in my clinic.
Got it. Awesome. So as a player and somebody coming into kind of a professional setting, what should someone expect when they go to a healthcare practitioner?
Yeah, that's a good question. And there should be a very general approach, should be the same for most disciplines, I would think, when you go in there. The first thing you should get is a thorough introduction from the person on who they are, what their qualifications are, and what they intend to do with you in that session or over the long term. You should expect a lot of questions. There should be a question asked of you. What are you here for? What is it that you're hoping to get? So there's some expectation there, and you should have that in advance when you come in. You should plan to tell them what you want. It's not just go and sit down and they're going to go on autopilot. Once you've had those, there'll be a lot of background questions on, what got you there, talking about how things started, your symptoms, and going through that. There may be things we will ask specifically about what makes it better, what makes it worse. Check your past medical history, any other medical conditions you may have, just to get a thorough understanding of the person in front of you and what's brought them here and all the mileage they have behind them. We'll ask if there's any other healthcare practitioners involved with it. Now, this is if you're coming to see me privately. If you came to see me as part of the sports team, well, I would already have access to strength conditioning, the coach, maybe the sports psychologist. If you're lucky enough to have a dietitian too, that's also important. But then, after that, there should be some kind of physical analysis, whether it's of the injured area or a movement analysis to try to determine, where, if there's a faulty movement pattern. That's, when you think about physiotherapy, it's the nuts and bolts of how you're moving, but so many other things we have to put on top of it. But essentially, you're coming in and you're trying to identify what an impairment is, which is, lack of range of motion, lack of strength, too much, too little, that sort of thing. And then when they finish doing that examination, there should be some kind of summary made. And that's really the part that sometimes gets skipped, but that's the most important. As you sitting there across from them, you want to have an idea of what they think's wrong with you, if they think that they're going to be able to help you, how they're going to be able to do that. And, going forward, there should be you should walk out of there with an idea of, how long is this going to take? What kind of things do I have to do? Do I have to see anybody else? Potentially, what's this going to cost me if I'm looking at, am I looking at coming for 6 months, or can you get rid of this in a few weeks? And we'll also structure that based on, knowing what the person's background is. Are they very independent? Do they have access to their own gym, or do they need to be supervised when they're doing that? So by the time you're finished, you should have that kind of laid out. And you should walk out of there. Well, certainly the last thing I guess is you should have an opportunity to ask questions, and that kind of goes out throughout the whole time of it. But certainly people need to be able to feel that all their needs were addressed. You shouldn't walk out of there feeling like you got rushed. And it's a common concern. People will go in and see, they wait 6 months to see an orthopedic surgeon, and when they get in there, they're in and out in 5 minutes, and they're not quite sure what happened. So I tell all of them, if they're going, have your questions written down, and don't let them leave until they've been addressed or you've had a chance to ask them.
Right. That last point is, I think, the most important thing I learned, I think, from you, was having that list prepared in advance, because it's very easy to show up and then kind of get overwhelmed, because as just an athlete, you often don't really know a lot about all the different muscles, tendons, joints. But if you can come in, have like a notepad or have your notes on your phone ready and have those things set, it definitely allows you to come in and be so much more comfortable and leave knowing, okay, I actually know where I'm headed, not just do these exercises for the next week.
Right. And you know what, that's a good point, Corson. You don't have to have a background in anatomy to know all this stuff to talk to somebody. I always felt, and from the very beginning, people, you own your body, you know what's wrong with it. You may not be able to articulate it or say it in the way that somebody else, in the language that somebody else might be using, but it's got to make sense. If somebody tells you something in the end, you think, that doesn't make sense. It's probably not the deal, because you own the body. So things will make sense, and you won't be far off. Most of what I can, if I take a proper history from someone and ask them the right questions, I've got a pretty good idea before I even lay my hands on them what's going on. And so a lot of that comes down to the questioning, but just trust that you know a little more than you think when you go in there.
Right. And when going into going to a professional and knowing that there's something wrong, how do you start to kind of build that trust with that person and really start to feel comfortable? Because I know it sometimes can be a little tough. It can be a little challenging to know, hey, like, this person's now gonna kind of help me figure out what's wrong with me, and if they mess it up, I might be dealing with this injury forever.
Yeah, well, yeah, that is a really, really important thing. So I guess when you're going in to see somebody, sorry, I have a few things written down here. Yeah, I would always say you can always do your background information on them first. Nowadays, you can just go on the net, you can look up anybody, you can get reviews on them. Most people should have a bio on there. So get a feel for whether this person has what you're looking for. Now, with the guys you're talking about and the women that are playing hockey, if they're involved with a team and if it's a program like that, you should have access to them regularly. And you don't necessarily have to wait till you're wrecked to go in the first time. I would try to go out and talk to them. Go meet that person if they're on staff or faculty, and see them when you're not injured. And just, if you're curious, some people aren't, that outgoing that they want to go do that, but there should be an opportunity where you get to meet that person. So that's the beginning of it, just to have them know your name, recognize you saying hi to you. That's a good start. Like I said, and then, check with other people. Maybe you've had teammates that have seen somebody and you can get their idea whether they like that person or what they thought of them. That can give you another good idea. But a lot of the onus is on the healthcare professional themselves, I think. And they should be doing a good explanation of, who they are, what they're there for. I mean, they're there to look out for you first and foremost. And we'll talk about that again at some point, I'm sure. But that's the number one priority, is that, you're well taken care of and they've got your best interest in mind. I think also as a healthcare practitioner, you have to be honest with the player. You're not really going to do them any service by saying, yeah, I think we can have you ready for next week, when they've, just completely blown out their ACL. And the reality is, you sometimes have to have that hard talk with them. Now, generally speaking, the surgeon kind of delivers that kind of heavy news, but you can certainly prepare them and say, you're looking at, potentially a 12-month rehab on this. And I think in the end, when you come in and you certainly don't underestimate things. We're all optimistic. We want things to get better faster, but there's some things that just that's beyond your control. So you need to make sure that you're straight up with them. I think that goes a long way with developing trust. And then I think probably the last point would be that you should try to incorporate the athlete in this process of rehab. Ask their opinion on things. Goes a long way with anybody. If it's a collaborative approach instead of somebody just forcing things down your throat, speak with them and get their opinions. You know, there's always a couple of ways to do things, and someone that doesn't work for them. So I'm not very didactic that way. I generally tend to say, well, what do you think about this, and get their opinion.
Got it. And I know you were talking about pain, and that was an area that I really wanted to cover, which is how can players start to understand when you are feeling pain, when to start to take that seriously, the difference between maybe just fatigue and feeling like a sore muscle as opposed to an actual potential injury that could cause or that could lead to something bigger in the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory when you get hit on the ice and your, shoulder's not in the socket anymore, that's the kind of injury that you need to get addressed right away. But most of the other things tend to be things that kind of slowly wear on you, and they take, you can put up with it for a while, and then at some point it becomes noticeable. It's, when I'm seeing people in my clinic, it's not very often that they come in and say, oh, this started hurting me last week. Most people, when you ask them how long, they'll say, well, it's been a little while. And then I generally start out by saying, are we talking weeks or months or potentially years? And when you give them that opportunity, then they kind of, there's usually a little smile and they say, yeah, it's probably been more like 4 months. That's how long it's been going. So then you get an idea of, how long they put up with things and what they've been going through with it. So, I mean, we talk about the obvious things like immediate swelling, trouble weight bearing on a joint. Those are things that you're going to go off the game right away. But the other things are, I guess, if you start noticing that you are favoring or changing how you're doing something, other people may notice it before you do. Because when you're kind of living with it, you kind of just roll with it and you keep going. But, the strength and conditioning coach may notice, you're not pressing very well through that right side when you're doing, or if they're doing unilateral work, it might become really obvious one side is, much weaker than the other. And so you might start to hear it from other people, or they might, that may be where the athlete first notices it. So, I mean, there's only so much you can do in clinic, in a therapy room you can't really get. Sometimes people will bring in some footage for me on ice and so forth. I mean, if you've got access to games or if you're there watching, that's the other thing you can do. But those are the first signs, is that the biomechanics start to change. You start to do things differently, and that's really a problem, because then you start compensating. And by the time you get someone to look at it, you've got about 3 things you've got to undo to get back to the original problem, because you develop too many compensations.
Right. Yeah. I think that's one of the biggest things that I've messed up with my kind of injuries in the past, is I've always used to think like I can just tough my way through it, kind of like me and Sharon talked about with the mental side. And
yep.
I think that's such an important point. So like with that, do you suggest that players like start to look into you mentioned like sending video in, but do you think it's something that's worth kind of considering, is like, hey, I send video in, I ask my therapist to actually look at this stuff, because I know I probably have had different muscles and different things that weren't moving properly that maybe I didn't think was an issue. But do you think that's something players should prioritize and consider early on, or maybe not?
I mean, sometimes like your therapist isn't necessarily, if they're very specific to your sport, that could be very helpful, that they could see, just watch some of your footage and pick things out. But other times it's maybe more specific to the area when you're having dysfunction or when you're having your pain. So, maybe when you're doing a slap shot on the follow through, and then you can take it in and say it's right here when it happens. And that gives them a better idea. Say, well, what is it? Is it lower extremity that you're not transferring the load properly? Is it at a certain wind up with your shoulder and external rotation that you're hitting that? So that's really important. And people can try to explain it, but a little 10-second footage can say a whole lot more than a conversation can take. And certainly being able to slow it down, freeze frame it, rewind it is important. So you wouldn't just send that out to to a therapist before you even get there. It's something once you've established a relationship, but if you have some of that to bring with you, I think that can go a long way.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I definitely learned something there. I've never even considered doing that, but that's something I'll definitely look into in the future with a therapist that I work with. Awesome. Okay, and then the last question I wanted to ask was, in terms of kind of getting the mental and physical aspects of dealing with an injury figured out, is there some advice you have for players when they're dealing with this stuff, like what they can expect mentally, what they can start to do in terms of like strategies, tools to use?
Sorry, are you talking about, if they're injured, how do they get the mental lined up with it, or are you speaking more like that?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So once there's a physical injury, that's it is a big deal. You think, well, you've hit your timelines. It's been 12 weeks. Everything's healed up. You pass a strength test. You should be able to get back out there and play. But that's not necessarily where it starts and stops at that point. There is a huge mental component to, that fear that is there something going to happen when I get back out on the ice again? When I get in that same situation in the corner where I've got to, receive that check, my shoulder going to hold up again when I get hit? So that's probably more something that Sharon could help with, I'm sure, in terms of coming up with the strategies that you might use. But there's lots of times where you need to, and it gets a little beyond what I do, but I do bring this up to people because I don't know that they think about it all the time, but the mental rehearsal. I mean, you can have the range of motion back and you can have all the strength there, and we know the weight bearing's ready to go, but you've got to kind of see yourself in that situation before you get back out there. So ideally we will ramp things up and say to them, okay, well, now you're ready to go back out, and maybe early on you can get back out there and skate with the team, okay, just so that you're back on the ice, you can get that feel and be around everybody again in that atmosphere. And then maybe you're in a non-contact, doing drills and so forth. But eventually we want you in there, doing the scrimmage and receiving the hit. And ideally the first time that happens, it isn't back in a game. But at the same time, no one's going to take a run at you in practice, because that's kind of defeats the purpose of just practicing. But so if you can't simulate that, then mentally you've got to sit yourself down and go through that, and you can see the lead up into it, and there'll be lots of things that happen with that. Anxiety will happen, and you're going to have to recognize when you're starting to feel like that, and have maybe some mantras or things that you say to yourself to kind of settle yourself down, some breathing techniques. I'm sure there's a whole slew of things out there that you can do, but realistically, from the role of what the therapist role is to prepare you so that you think, okay, I have a solid foundation. I know we can talk about the physiology with them and say it takes 48 hours for this and 3 weeks for the consolidation. The remodeling phase takes, and so once you hit those stages, structurally that bone is ready to take that pounding again. And so try to give them that reassurance. And as long as they've got their strength and their range of motion flexibility back up, then I mean, it should be there. But realistically, you shouldn't go back out on the ice with a whole lot of questions. If everyone's done their job properly, there should have been a gradual lead up to that. And then if, the last piece from our point of view is if there's anything protective we can do to help make that a little more sustainable, whether that's bracing, whether that's, a different set of shoulder pads, maybe it's something as simple as kinesio tape or something that you put on just to give a little bit more proprioception and just mental reassurance. I could feel that. I know where my shoulder is right now, and those are the things I think that we can do.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot. I think that really covered a lot of ground, and I think we were able to capture a lot. Is there any other advice or points that you wanted to highlight that maybe we didn't cover there?
No, I think a lot of that, I wanted just to reemphasize what Austin had said, and actually Sharon said the same thing, and you're going to hear this from everybody. This is all about communication. When you're dealing with an athlete, there is a whole team of people behind them, and the more those people talk, the easier it is, the better it is for that player. So communicating with coaches and And I'm constantly in upstairs to talk to the coach, run in to talk to the strength and training conditioning coach in there as well, so that everybody, and with the AT, so that everybody's on the same page. So you have expectations from the individual, but then you're constantly updating and individualizing that program for that individual player. So yeah, I just think that you know you're in a good situation when, and I think you should insist this, if you aren't part of a program with a team, with a physiotherapist, and you're seeing somebody independently, you should insist that, hey, here's the name of my strength and conditioning coach, my contacts for these people. I'd like you to, let them know that, because sometimes you passing an information on, it's secondhand, it doesn't work so well. So obviously the therapist needs to get consent from the client, but once they're okay with them communicating, then I think you should let everybody talk as much as you can. It's in your best interest.
Awesome. That is really, really good advice. And I think that's a really cool strategy to take to almost kind of build your own performance team if you don't have one.
You should. Yeah, everybody should have it. If you're, I would say even if you're 15 and older and you're still really serious about your sport, you should have a team of people going behind you that you've assembled. I know you did your version of that when you were coming up too. That's important.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Matt. I really appreciate it. And we'll keep things rolling here.
Yep.
Sweet. All right. So Alex, do you want to introduce yourself, since I already somehow managed to butcher your name right off the bat?
No worries. Polish names can be hard to pronounce. Yeah, so I'm Alex Winike. I am from North Carolina. I'm currently finishing up the last week or two of my graduate degree in nutrition here at Lamar University in Southeast Texas. I grew up playing hockey. Played hockey for about 15 years. But once you get to about 19, 20, there's not a lot of hockey going on in North Carolina. So I fell out of the sport a bit, and I was working and eventually found cycling, and I was a lot better at cycling than I was at hockey. And there's a lot better riding than there is hockey in North Carolina. So I became a professional cyclist, and that really got me into nutrition, as I could see very clearly what nutrition could do for me in a 5-hour bike race. So I just became obsessed with all things nutrition, went back to school for it. And now I'm about 3 weeks away from moving to Chicago. I'm going to be working at Northwestern University as a sports dietitian as part of a fellowship program. So I'll be working up there with all the athletes at Northwestern.
Awesome. Well, to start off, we've obviously had the focus around the mental side of the game. And I wanted to hear your thoughts on how nutrition kind of ties to mental performance, mental health, and really just get an understanding of that.
Sure. So there's a couple things that come to mind when I hear that question. In the first, most literal sense of nutrition and mental performance, you could think of an ergogenic aid, which is just like, I take this supplement or this food and that yields an improved performance benefit for my sport, right? You could think of caffeine as probably the most widely consumed ergogenic aid, right? I take caffeine, I'm a little bit more hyper, I'm a little bit more active, and there's a little bit more of a cognitive focusing until a certain point. If you have too much coffee, then you can't quit jumping around and stuff, right? So in the most literal sense, you could think of nutrition in terms of that, but there's not a lot of benefit to that area. Like I said, there's caffeine, and then maybe, there's new research on, adaptogenic mushrooms, but this is kind of in the weeds. And the bulk of that conversation really comes down to nutrition not improving your mental health or mental performance, but maintaining it and allowing a foundation for you to build like a great athlete. I kind of think of, and all of, everyone here, between mental health, sleep, your physical condition, and then your diet, those are all pillars of health. And upon that, those pillars lay the foundation. And if you want to build a strong athlete, if you have a gap in that game, the further along you go, the wider that gap gets. So when I hear nutrition and mental health, you can't eat, 50 grams of carbohydrate in this timing, and like there's no formula I can give you to improve your mental health. But in the absence of a good diet and good nutrition, you will not achieve optimal mental performance. You will probably not achieve optimal health. That how you eat will affect you in a physical sense and in a mental sense. But there's no like secret recipe. Did not mean to make a pun there, but I did. So there's no real secret recipe to like achieve, enlightenment. But it's definitely a part of that foundation. And I think the last thing I kind of think about when you say that is not necessarily how can nutrition impact my mental health, but how can my mental health impact my nutrition? And this is where we see people using nutrition or a food as a coping mechanism, as an escape. It's a negative reinforcement of sorts, which is, I feel uncomfortable, I feel anxious. Maybe if I just snack on this, I can escape those feelings. That's what a negative reinforcer will do. And when people start using foods in that sense, your diet can start to trend in a bad way just because your mental health is maybe not necessarily balanced, if that makes sense. And that's where we kind of see disordered eating and eating disorders start to pop up. The further you go down that road of I'm using food as a coping mechanism for insecurities, stress, all of those things, you see a lot of that. Over the summer, I've worked at part of my graduate studies is going to hospitals, private practices. I see all of dietetics in the nutrition field, and you'll see a lot of just this, like that coping, or people that are going into bariatric surgery, people that are like 400 pounds. You see someone walking down the street that's, extremely large, and a lot of people think like, wow, like what a slob. And what a lot of people don't realize is their mental health has just absolutely deteriorated. And instead of going to some other vice, they have found food. And that's on the extreme end of things, but that's kind of like a reversal of that question, where the mental health is more impacting your diet and nutrition more so than the other way around.
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing because it's more complex than just saying, oh, eat this food, it's going to make you feel this way. But yeah, you can start to, when you bring that awareness, you can start to notice how things are interrelated, and how that's the benefit of going to a nutritionist, is not just noticing like, hey, take this pill and you're going to magically feel better, but you can notice how those things all connect in such a deep way. That's awesome. So let's talk about kind of fueling your body and how that can lead to fueling your mind. So in a similar sense to what we just discussed, but talking more about using food as fuel and how to start to learn how to balance your diet and eat just more healthy in general.
Yeah, whenever I hear someone trying to say like, all right, what should I do? Like, how can I just in the most practical sense of how do I fuel for my sport, and working with college athletes, it's for myself, it's a conversation I have all the time, where people are either really motivated and they're like, all right, like I'm ready to do this. Tell me what to do. You give me a plan and I'll do that plan. I got this. And instead I tell them, all right, well, instead of you giving up pizza and never having pizza again, like what you say you want to do, why don't you just have like one less slice of pizza? Why don't you have a little balance in your diet here? And I generally frame that in the context of the 80-20 rule. And some people might know that, like business majors will know it as like the Pareto principle, where 80% of your revenue comes from 20% of your customers. But in the context of nutrition, 80% of your diet should be fueling you for health, longevity, for, better cognitive performance, for better, on ice performance. Like you're dialed in, you're doing the right things, you're checking all the boxes. And we can get into that in a minute. And then the 20% of it is like, you know what, there's a boxing match on tonight and I'm going to Buffalo Wild Wings and I'm getting some wings, because that's what I do when there's a boxing match, and you have fun and you don't stress about it all the time. So when when you talk about fueling just in general, that's a life approach. That's not just I'm going on a crash diet, I'm giving up all carbohydrates. That is, you could do 80-20 from here to whenever, and that's going to serve you fairly well. And in the context of how does that fuel your mind, I think it takes a lot of the stress and anxiety out of nutrition and dieting. Dieting is hard. Like counting calories is hard. Like being like, I'm going to meal prep and I'm gonna have the same thing every day for 2 weeks. Like, geez, that's like, I don't want to eat the same thing every day for two weeks. Like that's so mentally taxing. You have, because eventually you get to that point where like, I am now doing the thing I don't want to do every day for 5 times a day. And then like people wonder why the fad diet didn't work out, or like, man, I just fell off the wagon. Like, of course you did. Like you gave yourself an unachievable task. Like you're a person, 80-20. Like that's, if you can live by that and, if you can balance that out, then you're going to be able to have more mental bandwidth for other things like playing your hockey game or, just living your life. You don't have to fret over, all right, what's my next meal? Like, what did I have before? Like you've got those bases covered, and it's no longer something that is just actively occupying all of your mental space.
Right. Yeah, that is I think that's a great approach, and it could be extremely helpful for players, especially like myself, where I usually like to step all into things and just push way too hard. And then, you can see how it's very easy to fall off the wagon when every single thing you do has to be measured out, count the calories, count the carbs. So I totally get that. And like in transition with that, talking about carbs, and let's say talking about how oftentimes we see certain things get kind of demonized in the nutrition area and for just normal athletes who don't know a ton about nutrition. So let's talk a little bit about carbs and the kind of how people might not understand that, hey, just let's go on a keto diet and get ripped, and how that can affect your performance very easily.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack in that space, from the body dysmorphia issues where people like, all right, I see myself in the mirror and I don't look like this guy or this girl on Instagram. And that leaves you, this is what marketing does, is it makes you feel like there's something missing. If you don't have our product, then, you're not a complete person. And you see that on a very subversive level with, you should go on keto because look how cut I am. And that it does not, a cut keto Instagram influencer does not equal healthy functional hockey player that's going to get into that D1 school, that's going to get into the NHL, that's going to play minor league hockey. These are two completely different things. And just from a holistic standpoint, not even like a performance one, just a basic understanding of protein, fat, and carbohydrate can serve you well in life and not just in the performance. So, like you'll hear protein is going to build muscles. You don't really know what fat does, but it's there. It plays a role in plenty of hormonal functions that actually are very beneficial for mental health. And then carbohydrates are going to be your main energy source, right? And so what that means for a hockey player is that when you are doing these fast bursts up and down the ice skating, I mean, what's the average shift time in the NHL now? Do you know?
It's low. It's definitely somewhere around like 30 seconds, 45 seconds.
Yeah. So that's an extremely explosive effort, right? Like you're going all out, you're like stopping, starting, de-accelerate. Like again, that is pure carbohydrates. It's carbohydrates that you are consuming either in between periods, that's your pre-game meal, and that's also what you did a day or two ago. You have those carbohydrates are stored in your muscles, and your muscles use those first, especially for those explosive efforts. And so a basic understanding of that, I think, can help demystify a low carbohydrate diet or a ketogenic diet, especially in the context of this sport. You absolutely need carbohydrates days before, like up to your game, and then hopefully in between periods, like you could, that would be beneficial too. There's a kind of a continuum from, let's say you were just walking, right, going to an all-out sprint, and on that continuum from walking, you're predominantly burning fat. There's some carbohydrates being burned over there, but you have fat stores for days and weeks. That's how much, that's how efficient fat can be. And that's used for those, all right, I'm walking, maybe I'm fast-paced walk, easy stuff. And as you go more towards that sprint, your body is no longer able to use that fat. And instead it's using carbohydrates, and then carbohydrates that are in your blood and in your muscles. So it shifts further and further away from fat and more towards that. And if in the absence of you having a carbohydrate sufficient diet, it will absolutely impede your performance, especially in an explosive sport. And there's plenty of research to back up the drop in VO2 with a ketogenic diet. And what that means is essentially how much oxygen you can use during an effort.
Right. Yeah. I'm glad you were able to bring that up. And yeah, it's obviously a very complex topic, but to have that basic understanding can be extremely important and allow people to not get caught up in the fad diets, especially as an athlete trying to perform at your best.
Yeah. To that point, I think in the same way, everyone on here has preached, have a team, have a support system of people that you can ask these things to. And instead of just going, like Kyle on Instagram said I should do this, but he doesn't know anything. Kyle is stupid. He doesn't know. He knows nothing. Please ask your strength coach, ask the dietitian, ask somebody. And again, if you can't have those people physically around you, you can always find a good resource. You can find, I think Jessica Isaacs is the head dietitian at UCLA. She's all over Instagram. People like that you could find that have RDN next to their name, have gone through the credentialed license process to speak about nutrition and know all things sports. If you shoot them a message, I would put money on it that they're probably going to respond, or at least be able to point you in the right direction.
Right. That's awesome. Yeah, that's super helpful for just anybody who's looking to try to figure out nutrition or get some information. That'd be massive.
And similar to anyone watching this, or to any of your clients or anyone who works with you, same applies to me. If I'm on, Instagram is generally the platform I'm on. I've got free time every now and then. And if someone, shoots me a message about nutrition, I'm more than happy to help in any way I can.
That's awesome. Well, in terms of, let's ask one of those questions, because I also find this very challenging sometimes. When it comes to meal planning, organization, and just managing a super busy lifestyle, which when players are trying to play a season, manage a social life, and then also doing well in school, what are some of the kind of core things you recommend players look at in terms of resources or just strategies they should be using?
This is a great question, and a great thing, especially for young adults, to learn. And that, anyone, if you're, 16 to, in early 20s, this is something you should really start thinking about is, all right, how do I procure food for myself and prepare it? Because the price you pay for McDonald's it's not necessarily the price of your money. It's the price of your health, right? They're selling you convenience, not a healthy meal. That's their shtick. That's what they do. So if you don't look out for your health, no one will. To the people that say all right, I can't find time. I hear you, life is terribly busy, but I know you can do it. And even if it's not, cooking every single meal and meal prepping every single meal, doing what's the hardest meal for you to not eat out? I think that's pick the hardest one that's hard for you to all right, I can just never find time to make dinner. All right, but you have time to make breakfast and lunch. Cool. All right, so if you want to meal prep anything, pick the hardest one so that you're getting the most bang for your buck, so to speak. If time is what you are short on, make it count the most. And to that, I would say, I love this quote. It's like, do what's hard while it's easy. So if you know Wednesday through Saturday are slam packed, you should be preparing Monday, Tuesday for that extent. Don't try to meal prep or cook for yourself on Thursday when that's right in the middle of the busiest time of your week. Do what's easy, or do what's hard while it's easy. Personally for me, that is a Sunday. I'm usually busy doing stuff on Saturday, but Sunday evening, I'm winding down. I'm getting things packed up. I'm getting notes. All right, what do I have to do this following week? I'm looking ahead. And if you look ahead, you can kind of prepare and find where those sticking points. All right, I'm gone all day Wednesday. What am I going to eat? I don't know. Okay, well, maybe I'll freeze a dinner and I'll take it with me. And then, I'll be able to have at least that meal with me. And so if I have to eat out, at least it's not 3 times a day. Maybe it was just once or twice a day. And so picking and choosing your battles and preparing ahead are definitely skills to help with that. Now, when it comes to the actual skill of meal prepping and cooking and that, I would say you have an unlimited resource of the internet. There's YouTube, like it's Basics with Babish, I think. That's a great one. Epicurious has plenty of great things. Food and Wine. There's a million YouTube channels that are entertaining and fun that will walk you through cooking basics. And to that, I would say, pick a new dish each week. Pick a new cuisine. Maybe you would like, you like Taiwanese food. Okay, well, Google it, look it up, try to come up with that new dish this week. Or maybe you just I love French cooking. It's super fun. So I always try to pick another French dish or a French dish and, or a different type of sauce or something. So just pick something and try to learn a new skill each week. And if you're looking for motivation, a lot of times people they're like, all right, I don't really want to meal prep. I can usually hook people into saying I bet you would like to cook for your girlfriend or your boyfriend though. And to that, even if it's not necessarily I don't mind just eating a PB&J, I don't want to meal prep a healthy salad and some rice. I would say learning those culinary skills are not just for your performance, but it's also for beyond. These are tenets of life, not just hockey, not just a performance. And I promise you, your partner, spouse, significant other will greatly appreciate the effort.
Awesome. So the final question I kind of wanted to ask and to finish off on was, in terms of kind of giving people actionable advice moving forward in terms of nutrition, if you could pick one core thing that people could take and apply this week, what would it be? And what would you kind of push people to really look into?
If I had to push someone to, it's tricky because I want to give people an actionable thing, but it's so very personal. Mm-hmm. I would probably put money on most athletes not eating breakfast, at least in their later teenage years and early 20s. For whatever reason, I could say probably 50% of the athletes that I work with don't eat breakfast. And to those who don't eat breakfast, very simple challenge of if, in the morning, your liver glycogen is depleted, so your fuel tank is running on empty. And, the longer you prolong that refueling period, the closer you get to that practice or that game, the more compromised you're going to be in being topped off and ready to go. So the biggest thing I always try to advocate for athletes is try to find something for breakfast. Anything, something small. It could be just toast, peanut butter, and a banana. It could be a couple of eggs. Try to get something in, especially the older you get, and especially for if you're not 17, 18, you're still growing and developing as a person. You need this fuel, and not to mention you're burning, 1,000+ calories a game. You should be eating consistently. Breakfast will help you do that. And if, like I said, about 50% of the athletes I end up working with kind of have that habit of skipping that meal. To the people that have that covered, and I guess to everyone, I would always challenge people to try to add a fruit or a vegetable to their plate at each meal. Sounds very basic. It sounds like it's literally the goal I find myself working out with athletes. And I've been in school for 6 years now for this. And it's kind of funny because of all the biochemistry that I've had to take. What a lot of times what it boils down to for people to live a more healthy, fulfilled life is like, have you had your fruits and vegetables today? 9% of Americans, and I don't know about Canada, it's probably better, but 9% of Americans eat the recommended amount of fruits and vegetables. So I'd probably put money on most of the athletes that we all work with, and probably some of us, I know I'm guilty some days, of not eating enough fruits and vegetables. So if you could have just one fruit or one vegetable, or maybe both, every meal, you're going to get closer to that goal. The recommendation is 3 to 4 fruits and 4 to 5 vegetables a day. And so if you can get, both at every meal, you're getting pretty close to that.
Sure. Well, that sounds great. And yeah, I'll definitely continue to take advantage of that concept, or actually both of those concepts. All right. Well,
Awesome.
for the last part of the session or the seminar, I wanted to open up a little bit of a Q&A for the group. And what I wanted to do here was just give everybody an opportunity to basically just maybe ask a few questions of each other that maybe didn't get touched on, or you may have noticed while we were having conversations. And hopefully we can have about, let's say, kind of 3 questions, open up the dialogue, and then we will call it a day. Does anybody want to go first?
I'm trying to think.
Mm-hmm.
Alex, I have a question for you.
Sure.
So, like what you're talking about for breakfast, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of athletes that I do coach, they just can't eat like in the morning. Like they say it makes them sick, or like they say, there's no room. Like they wake up, they just don't want to eat. What could be some things, some ways for these athletes to just get something in? Like what you said, peanut butter, toast, like an apple.
Mm-hmm.
What if they don't like those things? Like, what are some things that they can possibly do?
Yeah, that's an awesome question, because it's something I run into a lot with most of our football athletes at Lamar. These 250-pound 6'3" guys coming in, and they're about to get after it, and it's 7:30 in the morning, and that energy demand is sky high. They need so much energy, and most of them are like, yeah, I haven't had anything since like yesterday at 6 p.m. And I'm just like, yeah, no wonder why you're dragging around the gym. Like I would be too. They get burned out after 30-40 minutes. To that, I would say I would look at a couple of things. One would being like, what's your evening meal? If you have an entire bucket of fried chicken or something that's just, not to pick on fried chicken because it's delicious, but like something that's like, if you, let's say you had that at 10:30 at night, that takes a long time to digest. Digestion's not necessarily optimal at night. So I could definitely see you waking up at, 6, 7, 8, and not necessarily being hungry and still kind of being sluggish because of that high fat meal. That could be one of the reasons, those late night meals, especially like a higher fat or a larger meal. And then the timing of when you're waking up towards when you're doing your lift or your therapy or whatever it is. When you're 18, 19, 20, whatever it is, you don't like waking up early. It's understandable. But trying to get up at least like 2 hours, hour and a half before your lift or practice, I think is very valuable because you need that time to digest. So what they could eat would be something that's a little bit more simple carbohydrates with some fat and some protein. A large protein or a large fat meal will slow digestion down. But if you just have, let's say, like 2 cups of orange juice, that might go through you too quick. And by the time you're getting to practice, your blood sugar has rose because you've got all of this, glucose going into your body. Now the insulin kicks in and now you're starting to plummet. So something small and relatively balanced, but higher in carbohydrates. And that could be something as like 2 Nutri-Grain bars or like a granola bar. Just that alone is better than, nothing. I think to like what you were saying is like doing some kind of lifting or some kind of physical strength or conditioning is better than doing nothing. In the same way for breakfast, having something is always going to be better than nothing. A lot of players find success with a banana, a granola bar or 2. And I always advocate for someone like, if you want to add something extra because you're finding yourself kind of dragging later on in that lift, I would try to add juice. So you should be hydrating first thing in the morning because you'll probably be dehydrated from, not drinking for 12 hours. I would recommend, have that bottle of water and put a cup of orange juice in it, give it a little extra flavor, something along, it could be that simple. Just a mixture of, electrolytes, juice and water. Not to mention having some kind of carbohydrate source in your water will help you hydrate better anyway. So juice, yeah. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Yeah.
Sweet. Any other questions that anybody kind of came up with, or any other topics that maybe you felt like didn't get touched on with any other conversations?
Well, in listening to Alex talk about the timing of when people wake up and why it's so important to communicate, it made me think of a scenario where maybe, Matt's referred an athlete to this team, our team, and who's coming off an injury, and Austin's seeing some deficits in the weight room and in the morning because of not eating, breakfast. But then I just heard Alex kind of talk about maybe waking up 1 to 2 hours before the time you need to work out to give yourself some room to build up that appetite and whatnot. And oftentimes I'm also kind of tweaking athletes' sleep schedules if they're having a difficulty sleeping. And I might say, let's try to expand that window and you wake up an hour before practice, which contradicts what Alex said. So that was just a really nice example of how important it would be to have your team.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to suggest something that goes against what another clinician has recommended.
Absolutely. And that's why having that team and the communication is important, because to that, now all right, well, let's prioritize what's the bigger issue here. And, sleep is definitely going to override. Like, we could probably get you some kind of nutrition in there and get you by. But if you don't have that sleep, like, that's going to be the bigger issue at hand. And so, yeah, that's why, like we've said this entire time, having a interdisciplinary team is key.
Awesome. Well, anything else that came up, guys, before we wrap up here?
I guess if you do have to wake up an hour earlier, probably try to go to bed an hour earlier.
Yes.
Don't just be like, well, I was getting 5 hours and now I just get 4. It's like, you should get more.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I know I myself, just as a player, got a ton out of getting to hear just the full spectrum of different information from different angles. And it really inspired me to step out and really look at the team I've kind of built and really look to improve on that. So I hope every athlete who checks this out kind of gets that same thing, or maybe they found something else from it.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. And
Thank you
guys for sharing.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Nice meeting everyone. Yeah. Thanks, Course.
Thank you.
See you guys.